One of the things that determines your level of success as a woman coach in high-ticket sales or a woman in sales is the level of visibility that you're willing to step into so that you can do the work that God has called you to do. Hello, beautiful, and welcome to the Prosperous World. One question I get very often is, how do you clear visibility blocks so that you can show up and sell high-ticket coaching offers? How do you show up all the time, even when you're not selling, even when you get a no? How do you show up when you're not being successful? What I want to talk about today is the metric that you are using to define success so that you can show up and do the work that God has called you to do. In the late 90s and early 2000s, I was studying for and taking the CPA exam. At the time, it was a real CPA exam. It was a 2-day exam. The first time I took it, I failed it by 2 points. The second time I took it, I failed it by 1 point. And I remember the Holy Spirit saying to me when I thought, gosh, I'm such a failure. Why is this happening to me? And the Holy Spirit said, you won simply because you showed up and took the exam. And you won twice when you showed up and took the exam, with everyone watching you and some of them rooting for you to fail. And you failed again, and you made a decision to take the exam for the third time. That was when you won. I felt more proud of myself after I took the exam for the second time than I did when I passed the exam on my third try. Because you see, my success wasn't tied to the external validation of I passed the CPA exam finally. It was tied to the fact that I had stepped out in faith, in spite of the fear, in spite of what I thought was at the time judgment, in spite of what I thought was all the gossip about how maybe stupid I was and I wasn't fit to take the exam and maybe I'm not meant to be a CPA. In spite of all of that, me showing up afraid, but in faith, in taking that exam was the day I determined I was successful. So for us as women coaches, it's not about how many clients you enroll. It's not about how many followers you have or how many people have to show up before you can do the live. It's the moment that you decide that you are going to do the thing that God has called you to do. In spite of the fear, in spite of what makes you afraid, in spite of the judgment, in spite of feeling whatever guilt or condemnation you've self-imposed on yourself, the moment you make the decision to do the thing and do it, that is when you've been successful. Because that's an internal, intrinsic metric that is not tied to profits, the number of sales, the number of yeses, the number of followers. When you show up and do the live with no one watching, when you show up and do the reels with no one watching, when you show up and do the video, you get only 1 view and 1 like, and you still show up the second time and do it simply because you're doing the work that God has called you to do, not because you're doing it from outside validation, you are successful. Success in high-ticket sales is not tied to how many sales you close. It's tied to how you show up for the who's, the people, the who that God has put you here for. When you add value to them, when you create that bridge, that space for them to see you and know that you have the thing they thought was impossible. You know how to get them to the place they thought they could never be because the doctor said they couldn't have the baby, or they thought they were too old to get married, or they thought I can't do this now, or maybe they thought I would never make $100,000 a month. Whatever it is in your niche, the moment you decide to show up for your people is when you're successful. Not when you close the sale, not when you make the profits, not when you have 1,000 subscribers, but the moment you decide to turn on that camera, talk to the camera, and say to the person the thing that matters to them the most, the thing they care about the most, the thing that's top of mind for them the most, the thing that connects to the very real problem or challenge or desire that they have in their life in this moment. And knowing that you hear them, you see them, you've created space for them to be deeply held, is the moment that you're successful. So for women who say, I want to sell high-ticket coaching offers, but I don't want to show up on camera, I don't want to be online, I don't want to do X, Y, and Z. It is a privilege to show up and be the hands and feet in the disciple of God in the world. It is a privilege to show up and be God's vessel in the world so the people who have what God is doing for them through you can get the thing. Without you being visible, they don't know the opportunity exists. They don't know the thing they've been on their knees praying for all night is right here, because you have chosen to wait until you have 1,000 subscribers before you do your first live, 1,000 people before you post your first video, or 10,000 followers on Instagram before you do your first reel. Show up, be visible. That is the metric of success. Let me know how this lands for you.